So I share the presentation. Could you confirm you see the first slide and now you see the second?
Yes.
Third?
Yes.
Okay. So last lesson we have an overview of the main biomass pathways to moves from biomass to bioenergy. So we treated thermochemical processes and biological processes with a zoom to anaerobic digestion. Today we will enlarge the possibilities of substitute the fossil fuel economy with a renewable economy, a green economy, and sustainable processes. And it means that biomass could be used as feedstock for a lot of final bioproducts pathways. For example, we will focus on biofuels for transport sector, and I mean biodiesel, bioethanol, also a look to biomethane, and of course we can again enlarge this view to a lot of final bioproducts or biochemicals. We can call it in these two ways. There are some differences, but we will try to be clear. For example, we can move to bioplastic production, natural pigments, for example, or nanocrystalline cellulose, which is a part, an interesting biochemical that has a lot of possible final destinations, and for example, the use of lignin for other processes and so on. So we will touch the biorefinery concept. So we can move from fossil fuel economy to green economy only if we can substitute every step, every product from fossil fuel refinery, and this is possible if we move to biorefineries. So the biorefineries use biomass as feedstock, and of course needs a lot of energy, so needs all the possible renewable energy sources, so photovoltaic, aeolic, geothermal, and so on. So there is a complete mix of all possible renewable sources to move from fossil fuel economy towards green economy. Okay, so just to repeat, because we just have a look to these definitions, but just to repeat three definitions we will use today into our pathways analysis, and we consider bioliquids, the liquid biofuels used for energy purposes. Energy means thermal energy, electricity, but not the energy products for transport. If you speak about this kind of bioliquid fuels or or gaseous biofuels, you have to use the word biofuel. So bioliquids, biofuel. Biofuel is liquid, of course, bioliquid, but used for transport sector. So biodiesel, bioethanol, or for example, biomethane, which is a gaseous biofuel, and yes, we will have time to go on detail of these pathways. Okay, so this is this difference, which is very difficult also to translate into English, because in English we use biofuel for every kind of biomass final product. So it's very difficult, but in Italian it's there are two different words to explain this difference. This is very similar in the concept to the one scheme we saw last week, last lesson. Last lesson we talked about energy processes. Today we will apply this concept to liquid or gaseous biofuels, so mainly for the transport sector. And okay, we see three feedstock, biomass feedstock, and you can also read this slide from it's like a bottom-up scheme. So we can start from the bottom part, and here we can see first generation biofuels. Okay, when we move towards the upper part of this scheme, you can see the second generation biofuels. What's the difference? We just introduced this very important topic, but first generation biofuels are biofuels obtained from some kind of biomass that are in competition with the food or food feed agriculture. For example, a lot of biomass you obtain vegetable oil are also for food production, some flour, soybean, and so on. And for example, also some cereals used for a pathway we just touched last lesson. Okay, so let's go on detail of this chain. So starting from the first pathway, you can see seeds, biomass seeds, where you can obtain vegetable oil. You extract this oil and you can transform it through a chemical process, transesterification. We will see in this lesson all these pathways on detail. So you can transform vegetable oil to biodiesel through a transesterification process. This is another kind of process, hydrogenation, where you obtain a biodiesel with a different name to consider the differences between these two pathways, and this green diesel. So from vegetable oil, from oleaginous biomass, oleaginous crops, you can obtain biodiesel in substitution of diesel in the transport sector. Starting from sugar or starch crops, you can move towards two processes, and are the same two processes we saw for the bioenergy pathways, and anaerobic digestion, and we studied this pathway, moving from this kind of biomass to biogas. And you can also upgrade biogas. Upgrade means separate biomethane from the other elements, like carbon dioxide mainly, and you can obtain biomethane, which is methane obtained from biomass, and you can use in every application of traditional methane, so in the transport sector, but also in your houses for room heatings or for cooking and so on. The second possibility for this kind of biomass, we are still on first generation biofuels. You can move towards fermentation, alcoholic fermentation. So the difference is depends on the microorganisms you use. For example, you just have a look to this process where we use different families of bacteria. Okay, if you move towards fermentation, you change microorganism, and we will go on detail in a few minutes. Just to obtain ethanol or bioethanol, just to say that you obtained from a biomass source. So this is the final biofuels. If you want to substitute gas line in transport sector, or you can also proceed to another chemical process, esterification, to obtain, yes, these acronyms are some gas line additives. Okay, so ETBE or this other one are two additives you use into gas line engines. Okay. Okay, this is the first generation pathways with all the problems we just talked about in the last lesson. So competition with food agriculture, the competition is also in the use of the agricultural fields to produce energy products, and so all the consequences of this good concept. Okay, and if we move towards second generation biofuels, it means, in general, not ever, but in general, it means you are moving towards lignocellulosic biomass. So biomass with yes, biomass similar to wood, okay, where lignin and cellulose are the main parts of biomass. And these are two very important pathways, and you will see that, yes, the pathway is more complicated. Of course, you start from a very hard biomass, very difficult to transform this biomass. So we complicate the process, but just to move towards sustainable biomass. Okay, and so you can start from this kind of biomass, and through hydrolysis and fermentation, you can also produce bioethanol. So bioethanol from lignocellulosic biomass. Okay, through a more complicated process, because you see you have either hydrolysis and fermentation, not only, because you have also a pre-treatment you have to apply to this biomass to obtain ethanol. Or you can move towards a thermochemical process. You should have the knowledge of gasification we talked about last lesson. From lignocellulosic biomass through gasification process to obtain syngas, and last lesson we stopped here. So syngas for energy production. Okay, but you can continue the pathway through in general a Fischer-Tropsch process, which is a chemical reaction, to use some components of syngas to produce biodiesel, and this is the acronym Fischer-Tropsch diesel, just to make a difference with biodiesel or green diesel from traditional first generation process. Okay, so you can obtain yes, biodiesel, of course. In general, we speak about biodiesel, we don't use acronym FT or green diesel, but we have to know what is the feedstock, the feedstock where you are starting from. Okay, I just added another possible pathway. We started to work just in the last month. So I added this just to show you that these pathways are only the main pathways. You can also move, integrate, mix to obtain a lot of final biofuels or bioproducts. For example, you can move from lignoscellulosic biomass through hydrolysis and another typology of fermentation to obtain not ethanol but green hydrogen or biohydrogen. And it's a quite new energy vector, is becoming very, very important just in the last 1 or 2 years, from the PNRR, National Plan for Resilience, and yes, the restart of economy is investing a lot of money through the production of hydrogen, and in particular green hydrogen. So hydrogen obtained from renewable energy, for example, from electrolysis or for biological process, which is the topic of our course. Okay, so you have a lot of possibilities just combining some processes or introducing new pathways like biohydrogen one. Okay, so it's also a scheme that you can integrate when some new promising pathways are entering in the research and in the development of these byproducts. Okay, so if this general scheme is clear, we can move. Sorry. Okay. If you don't see I'm moving through these slides, please inform me. So just a look to this, the main pathways on detail. So we can start from first generation bioethanol. Okay, so this is the overview of first generation biofuels. So sugar or starchy crops through a fermentation process obtain bioethanol, okay, and vegetable oils from sunflower, soybean, and so on through a transesterification process to obtain biodiesel. Okay, these are the two first generation pathways we will treat. Okay, just a definition of bioethanol, which is ethanol, ethylic alcohol, obtained from biomass and also from the organic fraction of wastes. And this is just a derivative is obtained from the general definition of biomass, and inside this category also the organic fraction is considered. So you can also obtain bioethanol from the organic fraction of wastes. Okay, you can obtain bioethanol through a fermentation process of starchy or sugar crops. Okay, I jump the availability of each hectare of crop because it's too it's too heavy to go on this degree of detail. Just a look to the pathway. So some more information we introduce into this pathway. So you can see that if you use sugar crops, for example, sugar cane or some sugar cereals, you can directly extract sugars. Okay, so you have just available, quite available sugars that you need for the fermentation. If you start from starchy crops, you first starch is a complex sugar, so you have to cut this complex sugar to simple sugars before starting the fermentation. So you could have another step, which is saccharification with some enzymes you have to use. Okay, so when you have sugars available, you can move towards the aerobic fermentation. So this is the precise process, aerobic fermentation, and you use a yeast, a particular yeast. This is the family Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's a family of yeasts we use for a lot of processes, not only energy processes, but also for food processes. You use this yeast to prepare pizza or to prepare bread or for wine production and so on, beer and so on. So it's a very, very large family, and there is a particular yeast from this family useful for ethanol production. So from sugars, you have a reactor where you provide the correct conditions of temperature, pH, and so on. And after a time, you collect alcohol thanks to these microorganisms. And you can see also distillation, because of course you obtain a liquid mixture where ethanol is only 5, 6, 7%, and so you have to distillate to move towards 99.9% to obtain pure ethanol. You can also see the molecular and the chemical composition of ethanol with 2 carbon atoms, and of course the corresponding hydrogen and oxygen elements. Okay, and also you can see the, if you want, the reaction to obtain the additive for diesel or for gasoline engines. Okay, just a look to the heating value. Not you, of course, you don't have to remind this value, but just to underline that this biofuel has an energy content very, very lower compared to gasoline, and it's an important problem for engines. But just a minute to reach this consideration. And here you can see also an easy way to to transform biomass. For example, 3 kilograms of maize correspond to 1 liter, approximately 1 liter of bioethanol. So 3 to 1, 3 kilograms to 1 liter bioethanol. Okay. Yes, this is the saccharification process, where you see starch, complex sugar that is transformed to simple sugar. For example, fructose. This is 6 carbon sugar, fructose, that yeast can eat to have energy and produce this kind of waste for their process, but which is our very important energy product, which is yes, bioethanol, and of course the production of carbon dioxide, which is the final product of every process, thermochemical or in general also biological process. Okay, so in quite every process you obtain carbon dioxide, which is the same, the crop, the biomass blocked for the growing process, so the carbon dioxide balance would be considered zero. Okay. Another way to yes, to see the fermentation process, but not particular new information on this process. There is also a production of small quantities of heat during this process, and this is yes the reason for the yeast to yes to decompose the this element to yes obtain energy for its own growth, okay, and replication, of course, growth and replication, okay. And the final step is the distillation. Yes, you can see the average concentration of bioethanol at the end of the fermentation process, from 9, also from 5 to 15%. And through the distillation, and the distillation means that you have a mix of water and ethanol. The distillation is possible because the evaporation temperature of ethanol is 78 degrees centigrade, while water evaporation temperature is 100 degrees, of course. So if you are in the range between 80 and 90 degrees, you can have the evaporation of only ethanol that you can separate from water and yes, make it condense, come back to liquid phase in another reactor. Okay, but this methodology, distillation, can also reach 95–96% of concentration of ethanol, because there is a azeotropic level that can move towards 100%. So if you want to obtain 99%, 99.5%, you have to use other processes, for example, dehydration, which is another process of separation to yes to concentrate through this level the bioethanol, and so in this way it's useful for our engines in our cars. You have to reach this percentage, otherwise you can't use it into the transport sector, because through water into the biofuel could create a lot of problem to the engine. Okay. Just an overview also to the energy balance, but I think that the main element to focus is this one: low heating value, gasoline compared to bioethanol. And you can see that bioethanol has 40% lower energy content than gasoline, and it's a problem. So if you use pure bioethanol, your engine has problem to work because it's created for another kind of energy content. And so this is the reason you can not exceed something like 7 or 10% of bioethanol into the gasoline. Okay, otherwise you should change your engines. For example, in Brazil, where bioethanol is very there is a lot of production of bioethanol, they changed completely the engines to work with a lot of bioethanol into the engine. Okay, so it's the main difficulty to enter this sector. So we also, if we produce more bioethanol, we can't introduce it more than 10% into the transport sector, because otherwise we could have problem with the engines. Okay, just to appreciate the the difference between first and second generation, we will now have a look to second generation bioethanol, just to appreciate this jump, this sustainable jump, because as I said to you, the main serious problem is to use food biomass in general, or food agriculture fields, and so the sustainability is also evaluated with this conflict, competition, but also conflict between food and energy crops. And so the second generation allow to overcome this sustainable process. So the same pathway we just see for the first generation. You start from lignocellulosic biomass, and you can move towards a thermochemical process to obtain biodiesel, or a fermentation process to obtain bioethanol. How we can make a fermentation of wood, a fermentation of cellulose, and a fermentation of some other elements in the lignocellulosic biomass. Here you can see the composition of a wood biomass. In general, you can see this kind of biomass like wood. So you have lignin in this brown chain. The blue one is hemicellulose, and the green biopolymer are cellulose. Okay, if you zoom to one cellulose filament, or one cellulose polymer, you see that cellulose is a very long sugar chain, in particular glucose. So every of these molecules is a glucose simple sugar. Okay, the similar for hemicellulose, where you have a long simple sugar chain, but in general hemicellulose contains xylose, for example, a lot of xylose sugars, which is a 5 carbon atoms sugar, while glucose is 6 carbon atoms sugars. Okay, so the idea that, of course, move to bioenergy pathways is to cut in some way these biopolymers chain to obtain sugar, and so these sugars could be used for fermentation process. Okay, so this is the idea. Of course, you can just imagine, but we will go on detail, but you just imagine it's a little more complicated to obtain sugars from these polymers and then to move towards fermentation. But complicating the pathway, we have a more sustainable pathway that can start from residues. We talked about biomass residues a lot in the last two lessons. So if you use lignocellulose biomass, you can have residues from agriculture, residues from forestry, or also some energy crops from not using agricultural fields, and so on. I can continue, but you should have this concept on your mind, I hope. So this is the meaning of moving toward first to second generation. Okay, of course we have also other components, but we are concentrating on the main component of this biomass structure. Here you can see the things I said to you, and these are some typical composition of some kind of biomass from forestry, for example, from agriculture, and this is the cellulose content. You see that cellulose and hemicellulose and lignin are together 90 or even more percent of the biomass, the dry basis biomass. You can see here in Italian as of course is dry basis, so without considering water, of course, and cellulose is between 32 up to 45% of the complete, the S received biomass. Hemicellulose is around 20-25%. Lignin is between 20 and 27%, and of course ashes and other elements. Okay, so these are some typical composition. Of course, we don't go on detail, but of course it depends. In the same plant, in the same biomass, it depends if you are considering the external part of wood, for example, or the internal or other part, for example, leaves and so on. So the composition can change also inside a biomass. Another table, you can see the composition of a lot of biomass, forestry biomass, or agricultural biomass, and you can see also the sugars composition of every biomass, so glucose, galactose, arabinian. So that there are a lot of simple sugars you can have inside the biomass, but of course you can see that glucose and also xylose are the main two sugars you can have inside the biomass. I underline this because of course we in general concentrate our processes toward glucose and in some cases towards xylose. The other sugars are not considered in a lot of cases because, of course, every microorganism prefers a sugar, okay, and in general glucose or xylose. Very difficult to have microorganisms that use every kind of sugar, simple sugars. Okay, and this is the detailed process for biomass, lignocellulosic biomass to final bioethanol production. So, of course, you have to make a lot of pretreatment to this biomass because we usually say that lignocellulosic biomass is very recalcitrant. It means that lignin, cellulose, hemicellulose are strictly connected, and so it's very difficult to cut and to separate these elements to concentrate our process to cellulose or hemicellulose, but you have to separate, of course, lignin, and you see the structure of lignin is very different from cellulose and hemicellulose. So you consider lignin as a residue of your process, not the main product, of course, but we will see we can also have a lot of uses for lignin. Okay, so this is the a part that we can consider pre-treatment in general. So from this very complicated biomass to obtain the part you are interested at, so cellulose or hemicellulose. Okay, so we will also have a zoom to these pretreatments, but your goal, your objective is to have cellulose and hemicellulose available and separated. Okay, then you move towards the core of the process, which is the enzymatic hydrolysis. And so you have some enzymes that cut the cellulose polymer, and also in some cases also hemicellulose polymer, to simple sugars. Okay, so you can use some yeasts to complete the fermentation process to bioethanol. Okay, so this is the main pathway. You have the residue from here and from here, because you separate solid, liquid, lignin fraction in a large part, but of course you have also some residues at the end of the fermentation process, and you can consider in the circular economy idea, every residue is a feedstock for another process, so this could be considered co-products. Okay, and ethanol is your objective for this biofuel production, of course. Okay, I don't spend time to see the collection of biomass, but just a minute to to show you the pretreatment process. So it's a very useful picture I used to understand the process. So this is the biomass still not pretreated. Okay, and you can see the brown, which is lignin, and for example in the external part of the biomass the concentration of lignin is very high, and the strict connection between cellulose, hemicellulose, and of course also lignin. So you have to break down this structure, deconstruct the structure, and the pretreatment, yes, as this result. So you in the true signification, you break down the biomass and you see what happens. Lignin is every part of the biomass breakdown, so you have a lot of surface available for enzymes work, and after for microorganisms access to these parts. Okay, so this is the meaning of pretreatment. Pretreatment could be a chemical pretreatment. For example, acids. You can use acids. It's not a very sustainable pretreatment. For example, a very interesting pretreatment is a thermomechanical process, which is steam explosion. And this is the pretreatment we have in our laboratories. Steam explosion is a sort of steam treatment. So you you put into a reactor biomass together with a lot of steam with high pressure and high temperature, more than 200 degrees in some cases. You can also reach 20 220 degrees centigrade. You wait a time, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then you open the reactor and there is a sort of explosion because you move from a high pressure to the atmospheric pressure, and you have a sort of explosion that complete the breakdown pretreatment. Okay, and this is a very interesting process we are studying for several years. From more than 10 years we are working with this pretreatment step. We can also have biological pretreatment, but they are not so investigated because these biological treatments requires a lot of time, and also the following processes requires time. So the problem is that you can have very long time pathways not interesting for industry. Okay, so there are there is also this possibility, but not so investigated. Here you can see the steam explosion pretreatment. This is a continuous system. We don't have this continuous system. It's from Enea that studied this possibility. We have a batch reactor for steam explosion, where when we want to pretreat some biomass, we put into this reactor a part of biomass up to 1 kilogram per each steam explosion. Yes, we complete the process, we collect the exploded material, and then if we need more treated biomass, we replicate the process 2, 3, 10 times if we need. Okay, and the parameter you use for defining the severity factor, it's a very important parameter because you have to decide the severity of this treatment in function of the biomass typology. You can't use very high severity parameters because if you increase temperature, pressure, the time you wait, you can also produce a lot of not deciduous products that block the fermentation and also the hydrolysis in some cases. So you have to find the correct compromise between severity and the not residual products in the steam exploded material. And so there is a question you can use to consider the time and the temperature you consider and the time you use to obtain a number 4, 5, 6 that allow you to give a number, an effective number to your process severity. Okay. And this is the meaning of what I was saying. Your objective is to transform cellulose into glucose and hemicellulose into xylose, for example, or also galactose. But if you use high temperatures and high pressures, you can also obtain a lot of other components, some acids, a lot of acids that can block the following reactions. And so these products can kill yeast, for example, or block the enzymatic process. So this is the importance of choosing the correct severity factor. Of course, you can't use a very low. On the other hand, you can't use a very low conditions because the risk is you don't break down the biomass. So we have more than 10 years experience. We investigated a lot of biomass, and yes, a great part of our researches are concentrated on this pretreatment. These are the inhibition effect, but not so important into this lesson. This is the final result of every pretreatment. You can see that if, for example, there is straw, paglia biomass, and if you make a low treatment, you obtain the same product you have before the process. So you have to move to more severe conditions, but take care to not obtain some inhibitors. So it's a very complicated step. Okay, there are also innovative pretreatment with ionic liquids or glycerol. So the research can move toward a lot of possibilities. You can see the ionic liquids. We don't have time, of course, to go on detail of this pretreatment system, but it's a possibility of green solvent. So it's the same work of acids, but using more sustainable elements. Okay, I go very quickly here because it's too long to go on detail. I just said acid pretreatment, and what is that also. Of course, the chemical pretreatment is the most efficient probably because you use very hard acids, and of course you obtain the separation of a lot of polymers, but of course you have to use acids, and you also have these acids at the end of the reaction, and these acids can also create problems in the following processes. So you have to separate them, and you have to consider them like a waste. So a lot of environmental and also chemical problems. You can also recover hemicellulose. In general, after the pretreatment process, you obtain hemicellulose in a liquid phase. So you can collect this liquid to, of course, investigate some yeasts that use sugars with pentose sugars like xylose. This is the enzymatic hydrolysis stage. I usually show you a very elementary picture, but make you understand what enzymatic hydrolysis is. In general, we use a mix of enzymes. For example, this is the cellulose chain, and every of these is a 3D view of glucose. So the first enzyme is endoglucanase that casually cut the chain. Then the exoglucanase cut in general here. So you obtain two sugars monomers, okay, which is cellulose. So every enzyme has an emission. Okay, this is a casual cut. This is a cut where cellulose is produced, and then beta glucosidase enzyme cut the cellulose into glucose molecules. Okay, so this is the enzymatic hydrolysis with the two main enzymes you use in the mix to obtain your final results, so simple sugars. And then fermentative organisms, in general Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast, to produce ethanol. Okay, so it's a very simple but make you understand what does it mean this hydrolysis and fermentation, enzymatic hydrolysis and fermentation process. Then there are other elements, other reactor, for example, for the separation of lignin, and I said to you that lignin is a co-product. You have to separate to use in other pathways, filtering and so on. This is another very important picture that shows the possibility developed during the several researches in all the countries. Okay, and you can read this in this way. This is the pathway: biomass, pretreatment, liquid and solid separation. So you have a lot of possibility to to have your hydrolysis and fermentation. For example, the simplest I've just shown you is the white one. You see here SHF, separate hydrolysis and fermentation. What does it mean? You follow the steps we just considered. So, okay, you separe liquid from solid, go to a reactor where you have the hydrolysis, okay? When you, with enzymes, when you finish hydrolysis, you have a second reactor where you perform the fermentation phase. Okay, so separate hydrolysis.
I don't know if it's only me, but I can see the presentation anymore.
Okay, thank you. Everyone has this problem?
I can see.
No, I can see the presentation.
Which problem? Sorry, the slide is okay. We can see the slide.
I think that Giacomo don't see this slide where I'm speaking on, but I think you can see separate hydrolysis fermentation. I've indicating this. You can see.
Okay. No, I can't right now, but I try to log out and log in. So
if it's only your problem, probably you have some connection problems.
Okay. Continue. I will connect again.
I can wait.
No, continue. Don't worry. I will lose some words, but I can.
Okay.
Don't worry. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Giacomo. These are the limits of online lessons, so sometimes we can lose connection. You can't see the PowerPoint and so on. Okay, waiting for Giacomo can solve these problems. I continue to show you this slide. Okay. Yes, if I exit from the presentation, I think you can have some problems. So I cannot see if Giacomo is come back to our room. Okay, please, if you can let me know if Giacomo is again online. So
not yet. Okay. May I make a question?
Of
while
course.
we're waiting for Giacomo?
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Simona. The first question is: Can I say that in a biomass plant, the output is biomass, and biofuel is always an output. Input is biomass, but biofuel is always an output, not never an input for biomass plant. This is the first question.
Okay. If I understand you have a second question, but if you want, I can just answer you, because otherwise I can lose some of your questions. yes, okay, we are studying, we are analyzing the energy pathways. So in general, I say that you have biomass feedstock and final bioproducts, for example, biofuels. But of course, a biofuel could be a feedstock for another process. So no, it's not a linear or not ever a linear process. So we are studying the steps of each pathway. But of course, if I understand your question, if you obtain a biofuels, these biofuels could be a feedstock for another process. For example, I don't know, you can stop to vegetable oil, for example, and then use vegetable oil for in an engine to produce electricity, or this vegetable oil could go in another pathway to produce, for example, biofuels, of course, but also bioplastics. We will see an example of this biorefinery. So at the end of this lesson, probably, we reach a final concept of biorefinery where all these separate pathways we studied are integrated. And so if I understand your question, of course you can stop in each moment and use this intermediate between breaks in intermediate for another process, or complete the biofuels production for your car, your transport sector, or use that biofuel for another process for energy production or for bioplastics. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, definitely, yes. Giacomo, I think is back. And a very quick question, the last one, is are there any difference in the chemical physical properties of a biodiesel, for example, or a biofuel in general, depending on the feedstock we use?
Of course.
Okay.
It depends on the feedstock you use and also on the process you follow. For example, also in bioethanol, but mainly for biodiesel, which is the next pathway we will see, you will appreciate a very important difference between biodiesel produced from the first generation with biodiesel produced from the second generation. So if you start from vegetable oil through a transesterification process, you obtain a biodiesel with some difference in energy content with diesel. If you obtain biodiesel from the second generation, you obtain a biodiesel which has quite the same energy content of diesel. And so it's yes, it's a very interesting questions you said me.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, and of course, every other question from you and from the others participants, the other participant is welcome. So Giacomo, can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So I just introduced the first pathway you can follow. So separate hydrolysis and fermentation. So you have the solid fraction you put into a reactor at some condition and some temperature, pH conditions. You obtain sugars, and then you put sugars in another reactor with other conditions to complete with the fermentation and obtain ethanol that you can purify. You can also follow the blue one process, which is SSF, simultaneous saccharification and fermentation. So you can have only one reactor where together you have hydrolysis and fermentation. And of course, you have only one condition, temperature and pH, for example, which are the main parameters in this step. So you have yes, also with you have some good advantages and some problems if you follow this way. For example, you need less time to complete the process because the simultaneous process allow you to have half time to complete the process. But of course, you have the same conditions for hydrolysis and fermentation, and we will now see that the optimal conditions are quite different. But it's another way to try to move this to this pathway. Another possibility is the, I don't know what color is, gray, the gray color, where you have simultaneous hydrolysis and co-fermentation. This is the meaning of this acronym. So you can, in a simultaneous way, you can have the hydrolysis stage and co-fermentation. So you have a double fermentation of exos sugars with 6 carbon atoms, and pentose sugars. So you can have the combined fermentation and hemicellulose fermentation. And this another possibility you have. Of course, you are complicating the pathway, but you have more feedstock to use because you use also hemicellulose together with cellulose. The last, there are also some combination here, but just to underline the last possibility, these are the 4 main processes, but of course the research always try to create new pathways that are better in terms of efficiency or sustainability of energy consumption and so on. But the fourth important possible pathway is CBP, consolidated bioprocessing, which is a simultaneous hydrolysis and co-fermentation. Here you can see the limits of the system. Okay, it's a simultaneous hydrolysis and co-fermentation, but the added value is that you produce enzymes from the same biomass. So a part of the biomass you separate in some way. A part of the biomass is used for enzymes production. So you you create other reaction with other microorganisms that produce enzymes, or some microorganisms that use that enzymes, and so you have a quite completely close step, because also enzymes are produced inside the system. So you don't have to buy them. For example, we usually buy from a very, very large company that produce enzymes, and the cost is also very high in general, mainly for industrial purposes, not for our purposes, because our quantities are very, very low, but it's an important cost. So you can close the chain. So another way to say the circular economy. So you obtain the enzymes directly from the same biomass you are using for ethanol production. So it's a very interesting process, still needs to be developed, and so this is the this is the importance of research for these new steps. Okay, so it's an interesting way to see this process, which is, I repeat, very, very important, not only for bioethanol production, because a lot of these steps, hydrolysis and fermentation, are typical of other pathways. Of course, changes the fermentation process, change the microorganisms, for example, but the concept is the same. So it's a way to see not only for this pathway, but also for some other pathways, for example, biohydrogen, that we will study in the next months, I think, in our laboratories. Just to complete the information, here you can see the optimal conditions of hydrolysis and fermentation. For example, you can see the temperature for hydrolysis is very high for these applications, of course, between 40 and 50 degrees centigrade and a pH of 4.5. For example, the fermentation of glucose works at lower temperatures, 30 degrees, maybe the pH is the same. And this is the reason if you have a simultaneous process, you have to make a choice. So, for example, you will work 35, 36, 37 degrees. So, in an average way. And of course, this means that you are not in the optimal conditions, both in the hydrolysis and in the fermentation. So you could lose some efficiency during the process. So every choice in these schemes has positives and negatives factor to consider. And then the research, yes, compare a lot of process and yes, make some conclusions about what is the better way for that kind of biomass, for that kind of sites, because probably there is not a best system for this step, but it depends for a very, very large factors, size, kind of biomass, the possibility to recover hemicellulose, the specific yeast you are considering, or another kind of microorganisms, and so on. So there are a lot of parameters. I'm just introducing you to these processes, but of course, if you will work with these activities, of course you have to go on the greater detail to consider 10, 20, 30 parameters together, and so there is a lot of work to do. Oh, okay, these are some theoretical and real efficiencies. Just I prefer to use this slide, yes, to have an idea of how much ethanol you can produce from for example 1 ton of a forestry product, abete. I don't remember the English name. Yes, you can follow this free composition of, okay. So if you have 1 ton of, sorry, spruce, I didn't read the translation of this word. You have 44% of cellulose. It's a typical composition, and so if you have 1,000 kilograms, you have 440 kilograms of cellulose. Of course, we are considering dry matter, dry basis without water, of course. So the importance also of the first lesson, we have to appreciate these these considerations. So hydrolysis to obtain this quantity of glucose. It depends on the mass balance. Of course, you are not creating mass, but of course cellulose reacts with other elements, and so the weight is approximately quite higher in yes, in this balance. And then the fermentation to obtain of the fermentation of glucose, okay, only glucose, to obtain ethanol. These are theoretical efficiencies, okay, just theoretical. Stop here for a moment. Of course, you have to use lignin for other processes, for example, energy production. Lignin is a very interesting biofuel for energy production, a solid biofuel. You can also use hemicellulose if you are able to ferment pentose sugars, or like xylose, mannose, and so on. And so if you have 22% of hemicellulose, 220 kilograms, you have the hydrolysis to obtain simple sugars. This is the weight, 245 kilograms. And finally, you have the fermentation with the theoretical efficiency, and you obtain approximately 166 liters of ethanol. Okay, so potentially, theoretically, you could add these two quantities, but of course you have to consider the realistic efficiencies, the realistic yield, for example, 75%. So if you add these two quantities and you consider an efficiency, a global efficiency of 75%, you obtain 350 liters, okay, of ethanol. Yes, you can also see if you have an optimistic yield of 85%, this quantity is higher, okay? So, just to compare with the first generation pathway, you remember that you obtain with 2 kilograms of biomass, you obtain 1 liter of bioethanol. Here, if we consider only the ethanol production, so this part that with the optimistic yields correspond to 250 liters, it means, if you have some problems to follow me, please ask me to repeat, but so it means that if you have 4 kilograms of biomass, you obtain 1 liter of ethanol if you only consider this pathway, okay? 4-1. So compared to 3-1 of the first generation, of course, you lose, in some way, you lose efficiency. But this is due to the fact that you are not considering these two elements, okay? You are not using lignin, of course, but you are also not using hemicellulose. If you consider also the hemicellulose possibility, you see that the how we can say the ratio is approximately 3 kilograms biomass, 1 liter ethanol. Probably a little better, because this equivalence is with 333 liters. We are between 350 and 340 and 95. So also a better possibility. So just to have a picture, a general picture. First generation, 3 kilograms biomass, 1 liter ethanol. Second generation, you move from 4 kilograms to 1 liters if you only use cellulose, but you can also move to 3 kilograms 1 liter if you also have the pentose or hemicellulose fermentation. Okay, so very also close to the first generation efficiencies, considering that you are using a biomass residues biomass residue in general, okay, from agriculture, forestry, and so on. It's the same story we just talked about, okay. Then you have a lot of material if you want to, yes, to go in detail. I repeat, we have not time to consider every of these slides into these hours, and so I just saying the time. And so some other information about, yes, softwood, for example, spruce, the one we analyzed here on detail. You can also have also hardwood, which is where the recalcitrance is higher than softwood. So this is also this important difference. Softwood, the connection are a little less hard, and hardwood, where the recalcitrance, the connection are very, very important. And of course, with this biomass, you have a lower efficiency than the one we saw here. And you can see here from the results here, 450, 480 final, efficiency. You can also have agricultural, for example, residues, corn stover or bagasse sugarcane. These are the bagasse and stover are residues from the corn and sugarcane pathways. So only residues, only lignocellulosic residues, not used for the production of sugar, for example, or for the production of cereals, for pasta or bread or other kind of products. Okay, and here you can see the efficiencies that are better if you use also, of course, hemicellulose. You see here, because this kind of biomass are less recalcitrant. Of course, they have a lot of hemicellulose, and so the efficiency is good only if you are able to produce ethanol also from hemicellulose. Otherwise, the efficiencies are lower, okay, because it's lower the cellulose content. So just to give a sense to this table. Okay, we can continue also with the production costs. Okay, of course, in general, this is valid for quite all the pathways from biomass. The production costs are higher than, of course, fossil fuels costs. So it's not useful to lose a lot of time with this consideration because are very known, but in general, every cost is higher. Of course, not for the production costs, considering only the production, but because, of course, in the biofuels or fuel products, there is a lot of taxes you have to consider. During these days, I think you see TV, and yes, you should know that. Okay, it's not here, but you know that 50%, maybe also more than 50% of the fuel cost for gasoline or diesel are taxes. Okay, and so considering these taxes also for biofuel production, the costs are higher. Of course, you can create competition with the biofuels if you eliminate taxes or reduce taxes for biofuels production, but it's a very complicated and political strategy that is not the object of this course. Just and then we will have a break. Sorry. This I go quickly because we will see these laboratories in the next lesson, but just to also have a look also to the ones that will not attend this this visit. This is our laboratories. This is the system for the production of water, not so interesting, but this is the steam generator for steam explosion process. So we need a boiler for steam generation. And of course, in the idea of a biorefinery or a sustainable process, the energy that you need for steam generation must be obtained from renewable energy, of course. Otherwise, the sustainability of the process is just a big problem before starting the pathway. This is the steam reaction system. It's the starting from here. We usually put the biomass from there. This is the main reactor where you have 20-25 bar and steam, of course, so you have the mixture of biomass and steam. Then there is a valve that you open after some minutes, and there is a very important explosion. It's a very it's an explosion you can also appreciate if you are present when this pretreatment is working. And this is the part where the expansion, the explosion is completed. And from here, you collect the solid and liquid fraction, and you can also just separate these two fractions. These are some examples of the hundreds biomass sources we tested during our activities: straw, wood chips, cardoon chips, cane from our lake, Trasimeno Lake, and these are only some examples. Some phases of the process. Yes, the exploded solid fraction, the liquid fraction is inside this part. Okay, these are the samples, collected samples. The hydrolysis reactor, where you have the enzymes that produce sugars from cellulose. The same is the fermentator, so we have two reactors for the two processes, and the distillation system for the concentration of bioethanol for the analysis when we perform to ethanol. And this is the final results for a lot of biomass sources, the lignin, and at the end of this lesson we will spend a few words also for lignin. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm here. Otherwise, before speaking about biodiesel, we will have a small break, 10 minutes, 15 minutes break. Okay? Any question?
How difficult is to control these parameters? How difficult is the control of these parameters, these needed parameters, and how dangerous is the plant if the parameters goes under control?
What part of the plant in particular? The pretreatment?
The most critical part, for example.
Okay, this kind of plant have not any dangerous problem of explosion or chemical emissions. We don't have any of these problems because we have only a treatment with steam at high pressure, of course, but it's not like a nuclear plant where you can you can lose the condition and have a reaction that could finally arrive to an explosion. Here we have in a very controlled situation. So you have a pressure you create into the boiler, and you put this pressure into the system can also reach 30 bars, 35 bars. So as a very lot of security systems. So there is not any dangerous problems. Of course, the problems will be for the good pathway results, because if you of course use very high treatment severity, you can obtain some inhibitors that block the reaction. So the problems are if you want to obtain a good pathway and reach good efficiencies, but there isn't any problem of explosion danger or chemical release in atmospheres and so on. All the approaches are like green approaches, because you use only steam, you don't use acids, for example. The organic acids you obtain, like inhibitors, are not a problem for the health of the researchers, because are organic acids that blocks only yeast, of course. So there are not problems of this kind.
So just cost problems, I guess. Just problem of cost.
Yes, which are very, very important. Cost problems. Yes, you are underlining a very important phase, because of course you can see the energy costs inside the pathway, the enzymes cost, the time, because we didn't I didn't say you, and sorry for this, but hydrolysis requires 1 or 2 days to complete the process. Fermentation requires 1 or 2 days. So it's also a very long process, and very long process means a lot of costs. Okay, so it's another very important problems. So during pretreatment, which is very quick, you have energy cost. During hydrolysis and fermentation, you have a cost generated from the time you need, from the high enzyme dosage you need. Then you have the extraction phase, the distillation process. So a lot of time, energy, and other product costs. And so, yes, it's the main limit to the diffusion of this pathway, of course.
So can I say that considering the size, the physical size of the plant and the cost, it's much more better a solar plant than a biomass plant?
There is not a final answer to these considerations, because there are so many parameters you have to consider. But for example, yes, you are considering solar plants. Solar plants do not allow you to obtain bioethanol, for example. You can obtain bioethanol wholly from biomass. So just this it's an important difference. And of course, if you want to produce electricity, probably photovoltaics, and I'm sure that photovoltaics is more competitive than the biomass one, and is the reason you have millions photovoltaic systems and only a few biomass plants. But for example, if we move to biofuel and bioproducts pathways, yes, here only you can work only with biomass. You can't work with solar energy. You can obtain energy from solar for these processes, but not the feedstock. Okay. Okay. So you have lost only this very simple slide, just to remind you the ratio between 3 kilogram seeds are able to produce 1 liter biodiesel. Okay, this is the only yes, this is the only information I underline again, which is important, which is the same with first generation bioethanol, okay, and so it's easy to remind. And here where we are, so I said that bioethanol is very different from gasoline. There are two different things, but you can also use a percentage of bioethanol together with gasoline. Biodiesel is very similar to diesel. If we are seeing the chemical formula of biodiesel, which is very similar to diesel, and so also the energy content is similar. It's not so different like ethanol and gasoline. Okay, and it's important because probably for biodiesel the possibility of have a high percentage of biodiesel mixed with diesel are very, you could reach very important percentage, not only 7%, which is the actual limit. Okay, so you see when you go to a distribution system, you see B7. B7 means biodiesel 7%, so the maximum percentage of biodiesel is 7%. But probably this percentage could be higher without any problem with the engine. So I changed the slide, so if you don't see the new slide, please let me know. But if you see, you can see the pathway of biodiesel production. So from seeds, if you need a pretreatment just to separate seeds with, for example, other part of the biomass, then the extraction with the mill in general, not ever the refination of the vegetable oil, then the transesterification and other process to recover the reaction substance, methanol. Just a moment to see the chemical reaction, and finally the biodiesel. So this is all the possible steps of the pathway. In general, you don't need to make a refination of oil because it's not for alimentary use, so you don't need to any refination. Very, very quickly, I go to the main points of this part, just to mention that you can extract vegetable oil from seeds with a mechanic process, so a mill that create a pressure that extract oil, or with chemical solvents. But for example, for biomass definition, you cannot use chemical solvents. So the only way to maintain the biomass definition of vegetable oil is to work with a mechanic physical process. Sorry. Okay, this is another way to see the pathway. I go very quickly here just to say the cochlea, which is the mechanical extractor. So you put the seeds from for example from this way, or yes, probably from this way. This cochlea create a very high pressure. So for example, oil exit from the surface, and you can collect at the end of the pathway the residue of seeds, which is named panel. Okay, and for example, this residue can be used for animal feeding. So circular economy again, using every final co-products of the main products, which is vegetable oil. Chemical extraction with hexane, but as I said, it's not allowed. Is if you want to yes, to remain into the biomass definition. Okay, yes, I stop a moment to the main important part of this pathway, which is the chemical transformation from vegetable oil to biodiesel, the element we name biodiesel, which is this part. Transesterification. Usually this is vegetable oil and is explained, is shown like a, sorry, there are very specific terms. I don't know in English. Is triglyceride is the correct way to mean this name. So this is vegetable oil that react with methanol. This is the chemical formula of methanol, and you can also see how the several parts of the molecula moves to the final products. You obtain free in mass, free molecules of biodiesel. This is biodiesel. This is another molecule of biodiesel, and this is another one. R is the hydrocarbon chain. Okay, so here you can see R is the hydrocarbon chain which is yes, not so different in between R prime, R second. It depends on the number of carbon in the hydrogen in the hydrocarbon chain. Okay, usually we are speaking about 12, 13, 14 atoms of carbon, okay, that create the hydrocarbon chain. Okay, so R is the same you have here. Okay, so this is the final bioproduct we want to obtain, biodiesel, and this is the co-product, which is glycerol. Co-product because glycerol or glycerol or also named called glycerin has a lot of application. And of course, if you want to perform this pathway, you have to take in consideration the recovery of glycerin, because you see that to transform 100 kilograms of vegetable oil, you need a lot of methanol, 10%, you see, 10% methanol, and you produce at the end of the process 10% of glycerin. So very important fraction of products and co-products are obtained. So yes, you have to think about how I can provide methanol. For example, just to give you input into a circular economy way, can I produce methanol from biomass? So can I produce biomethanol? Okay. Otherwise, methanol is a fossil product. So a lot of fossil fuels have to be used for this reaction. And of course, 10% of final mass, final weight you obtain is a co-product. So you have also to find solution for glycerin recovery. And okay, of course, we have a lot of possibilities. So you have to read this pathway in a circular economy way. Otherwise, we should not speak about this possibility, because there are too many negative elements for the sustainability evaluation. Okay, But this is also the limit of this first generation biodiesel. The vegetable oil, because create competition with agricultural for food production, and of course a lot of methanol you need for the reaction. Okay, so this you can just see some limits to this pathway, or you have to just introduce a circular economy vision. Okay. Yes, I don't know if I have no. Another important thing. Yes, vegetable oil. If you consider all these hydrocarbons chains, is a vegetable oil with approximately 50, 48, 45, 50 atoms of carbon, so a very long chain. And it means a very high viscosity, because the viscosity, or I can say in a simple way, what is the density, the density of oil. Of course, vegetable oil has a high density, high viscosity. When you obtain biodiesel, which hydrocarbon chain is, as I said, you 15, 16 atoms of carbon, of course, the viscosity is lower. Okay, it's a very important parameter for the use into engines. Okay, you can't use, of course, vegetable oil directly into your diesel engine, because this viscosity block everything in a very quick time. Yes, you can use biodiesel because the viscosity is lower. Not so lower as diesel, but comparable. This value 37 is absolutely not comparable with diesel viscosity. I will show you now. I go very quickly to this information. Okay, just to summarize the main characteristic of vegetable oil, diesel, and biodiesel, first generation biodiesel. Low heating value, energy content. You see that diesel has 43 megajoule per kilogram. Biodiesel is 37, 38. So not so far away from diesel energy content. If you remember, ethanol is 40%. As 40% less energy content. Here we are speaking about approximately 10% of difference. Okay, and it's a very important, element to consider. Lower is the vegetable oil energy content, which is around 33 and 34 megajoule per kilograms. The second element, you have a lot of other information, but the second main element is the viscosity. As I said, for example, at 50 degrees, the viscosity of vegetable oil is approximately 25-30 centistokes, which is the unit we use for the viscosity. And you can see that diesel is very lower. Diesel is 2.5. So of course you can't compare diesel with vegetable oil viscosity. Yes, you can compare. There are some difference, of course, but you can't compare these two viscosities. And so the main reason you can use biodiesel directly into diesel engines, okay? And probably the maximum percentage could be, I think, also 20% in the future into the engines, okay? Oh, I don't have time to go in detail on the other characteristics. These are the main characteristics that you need to appreciate the whole energy observation we will do. So here you can see the famous 7% that now can be used for biodiesel mixed with diesel. Of course, as I said to you, we can move towards 10-20% without technical problems. Okay, of course, we have to produce that quantity of biodiesel, and as we had the look in the first lesson, yes, the production of biodiesel and of course bioethanol are not so high, so it's also difficult to produce large quantities of these biofuels. I mean, not only technical but also production problems for this sector. Okay, no, I will not show you the problem into the engines, because we have not this goal into this course. Just a mention to emissions. If you use biodiesel instead of diesel, and you can see the decrease in quite all cases of emissions if you use 20% of biodiesel, and the huge decrease of emissions if you use pure biodiesel, so biodiesel is 100%. Of course, you don't have not burnt hydrocarbons when you use diesel, which is a very dirty fuel. You produce a lot of not unburnt hydrocarbons. Okay, you have a very important reduction of these pollutants if you use biodiesel. You reduce, of course, CO2, of course, CO, of course, you reduce particulate matter, so the very dangerous matter. You produce just a little more of NOx due to the elements in the biodiesel present. So you can have a very low increase of NOx, nitrogen oxides. Of course, you reduce SOx because you don't have sulfur into biodiesel, and so you can see minus 20%, minus 100%. You had not sulfur into biodiesel, while you could have some quantity of sulfur into diesel and the other elements. Yes, this was the picture I would like to show you for gasoline, but you can see here for diesel, and it's the same, absolutely the same for bioethanol. So here you can see how much taxes are present. So taxes, and in particular VAT, or value added for in English, IVA in English. So you can see that more than approximately 50%, maybe more in some cases, are the taxes, and this is the gain for the distribution, the distributors, and this is the production cost, of course. So yes, these days we had a look to everyone had a look in the television where with these pictures were shown. This is a very old picture, but of course we are sure that the percentage of taxes is the same, maybe could be more than 50%. And just to say you that, of course, if you produce biodiesel, you have a cost for production cost higher than this one. Okay, of course it's higher, but probably it's not the addition of this one with taxes. So probably the cost of biodiesel production will be €1. Okay, so if you eliminate taxes from biodiesel production, probably you would have a true competition between prices. Okay, I think it's important to know, because today we diesel and gasoline reached a huge price, and this is the how our government reduced this increase of price, eliminating some taxes. So if we want, in some cases, we can eliminate taxes, and so the same reason could be applied to biodiesel or bioethanol, cut of taxes. Okay, very. I have to accelerate the presentation. Switch to the second generation biodiesel. I don't repeat the feedstock biomass, because you should know very well that biomass feedstock could be agricultural residues, forestry residues, and so on. And you have the same some similar slide that we have seen. I very quickly go to the steps, the important steps of the pathway. And so pretreatment, biomass pretreatment. So in general, mechanical pretreatment, you have to obtain, for example, chips, so very small pieces of biomass, or sawdust. In some cases, it depends. It's better to have small pieces of biomass, so to have a good reaction, a good thermochemical process of gasification, because for second generation biodiesel, you start from a gasification process. You remember that gasification is a sort of combustion, a part of combustion, but the main part is a reaction without oxygen. So we have less oxygen than we need for the complete combustion. So in a small part, 25% approximately, we have a combustion just to produce energy for the reaction of gasification. So without oxygen, a part of biomass transforms itself into syngas. Mainly consists of CO2, hydrogen, and also other components. These are some information about gasificators, but here is the syngas composition. You can see hydrogen, approximately 35–40%, and carbon monoxide 22 to 25%. So then, as I said, we have 25 approximately combustion, and so you produce carbon dioxide, which is the result of combustion. So you have between 20 and 25% of carbon dioxide, a part of methane, and some other components. Okay, what is the elements we are interested at biodiesel production? The first two, hydrogen and carbon monoxide. These two, and also the ratio between these two components is very important. For example, hydrogen should be higher in content than CO, and in general between 1.5 and 2 times carbon monoxide. These are the optimal ratio between these two elements. What is the other process we need to obtain biodiesel? It's a chemical process, which is called Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. the name derived from two Nazist scientists during the Second World War that for the first time discovered the possibility to transform, in that case, to transform coal. So gasification of coal, we are talking about Second World War. These two scientists, were able to transform coal. Germany is and was very rich in coal production. So coal transformed to diesel, not biodiesel in that case, but diesel. That was that was the fuel of their armor. So when Germany was circumvented, all the allies were arriving from the north, from the south, Americans and Russians and so on. A very quick way to speak about the story, but just to say that they didn't have the possibility to have diesel, and so they found the way to obtain diesel from a local fuel that was coal. They have a lot of coal mines in Germany, and in this way, the Germany was able to resist some other months. Then, of course, the Americans, Russians, Italians were able to defeat the Hitler and Germany force, and the war finished. But just to have a story of this process, and also why we call it Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. Franz Fischer and Hans Tropsch were the two scientists discovered this process. Of course, nowadays, this process moved to a sustainable way. So we can also apply this process to biomass. So biomass gasification, and then Fischer-Tropsch process. You can see the chemical reaction. Just to explain this reaction, so you start from CO and hydrogen, and you have to imagine this reaction like Lego, like your Lego game. So you have these small elements you combine, and you create a chain up to the biodiesel hydrocarbons chain. And so you build with these components, with this reaction. It's I'm speaking in a very simple way, just to make you understand this. But of course, we are speaking about very complicated chemical reaction, and so it's very difficult to control the reaction, to stop the reaction in the correct moment, and so on. So, but just to have an idea of the process. And so, yes, you have another way to see CO that react with H2 to obtain, for example, CH2. Then another reaction to enlarge the chain to C2H4, and so on, up to final biodiesel chain. Okay, very high temperatures, very high pressure are needed, a lot of catalysts. It's a very complicated reaction, and it's more complicated for biomass because you obtain a dirty syngas where not only CO and hydrogen are present, but also a lot of not the considered fractions. You have to separate, or that they can create a lot of problems to the catalyzers, to the conditions, and so on. So there are a lot of reactors useful for Fischer-Tropsch reaction, and yes, these are the results of this kind of Fischer-Tropsch diesel, biodiesel, and I don't see the energy content here, but for example, you can see this important element, viscosity. You have the limits, and obtained biodiesel has a viscosity which is the same of diesel. First generation biodiesel had the viscosity of 4, if you remember. Now we are the same results as biodiesel. So obtained biodiesel is so pure that you have the same viscosity and the same energy content of diesel, of fossil fuel diesel. And some other considerations about costs. Yes, here we have higher costs, of course, because you have appreciated the complexity of the pathway. So the complexity means high cost, and of course the costs are very high. But for example, in the nowadays necessity of produce energy locally to avoid the problems for wars and other, of course it's an added value that you have to consider. So higher costs, but you can produce biodiesel from biomass from Italy, and so you can locally produce biodiesel. Otherwise, you have to import oil and create a refinery to produce biodiesel, but your feedstock comes from abroad. So it's not possible to produce biodiesel with our sources. We have some sources of fossil fuels, but not so important. So even if we start to extract oil from our sources, probably we don't have the quantity for our security, energy security. The last consideration is environmental consideration, and just to appreciate the for example, greenhouse gases emissions of fossil fuels, first generation biofuels and second generation biofuels. We don't have time to go on detail of every pathway, of every biomass pathways, but you can see that, of course, fossil fuels have great greenhouse gas emissions. This is the unit we have, CO2, grams of carbon dioxide, 4 kilometers of your car, okay? It's a unit we can use. And you see that in some cases, first generation, mainly for bioethanol, first generation emissions are not so lower than fossil fuel. Better if it's for biodiesel, mainly for rapeseed olio di colza, semi di colza, scusate. Of course, if you move to the second generation biofuels pathways, you obtain the best results of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Okay, and for example, second generation biodiesel from straw has the lowest emissions, also from forest residues, and also bioethanol from straw. These are the more promising pathways from the point of view of environmental emissions, greenhouse gases emissions. Okay, these other graphs shows also the reduction of a lot of pollutants into comparing diesel to biodiesel, yes, you see that the reduction of nitrogen oxides is not so interesting, but of course the CO reduction, the hydrocarbons reduction, and also the particle reduction is very important. Okay, these are some important conclusions of biodiesel emissions. Okay, just some input to other biochemicals production possibility from biomass. For example, nanocrystalline cellulose. Nanocrystalline cellulose is, in a very, very simple way, is cellulose. In general, cellulose is amorphous, as an amorphous state. Okay, so there is a very confused development of the chains. You have seen the cellulose chains are very confused in the space. So amorphous state. Nanocrystalline cellulose is a fraction, a very small fraction of cellulose, which has a structure. It's not amorphous, but has a structure, and the structure has a nanometric level. So you have a very important structure in the space at nanometric level. So in the dimensions of nanometer. Okay. In a very simple way, is the difference between coal and diamond. Okay, so coal is carbon in an amorphous state. Diamond, with interesting characteristics, is carbon in a structured way. Okay, the same for nanocrystalline cellulose. The structure gives to the NCC, nanocrystalline cellulose, very, very interesting chemical physical properties. Okay, and so we can, okay, this is the approach to produce nanocrystalline cellulose, nanomateria. So you have a huge range of possibility to use nanocrystalline cellulose. You can, for example, it's a very resistant polymer, so you can use it for reinforcement, for example, to reinforce natural polymers. When you use bioplastics, you see that in some cases it's a very poor material, for example, for bags, for bio bags, and often you break down these bags in a few minutes. Using adding nanocrystalline cellulose, probably you give a great resistance to these polymers to be used for a lot of applications. Okay, so yes, I jump the theoretical part because yes, you just to see that here you can imagine this cellulose chains, and some area of this cellulose line, the black one, have a crystalline structure. Okay, so if you find the way to extract nanocrystalline cellulose to separate this product from the other part, yes, you can use it for a lot of application. I just said to you the reinforcement, but for example, I jump to applications. Okay, no, I can jump so much. So just to summarize, NCC cool as a low cost of feedstock. Of course, we have a high cost for extraction. Okay, but your feedstock has a very low cost. Every lignocellulosic biomass have inside a percentage of NCC. Is renewable, sustainable, great abundance of this material, the biodegradability of the material, and so on. So very important chemical physical properties, and here you can see a list. Of course, the resistance is the most interesting aspect. Okay, of course, it's not toxic. You can make a dispersion in water, so other possible application. And just to see that, for example, is more resistant than steel. You see, very, very high resistant. Comparable, the elasticity is comparable to steel, for example, but the weight is very, very low. So very, very strong chemical physical characteristic with low weight. So you can appreciate the potential of this material. Okay, is very, 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 very low weight. Less than aluminum, but characteristics stronger than steel. So a potential, enormous potential. Of course, the limits are the extraction pathway, which is very difficult and expensive. And of course, the possibility of extract this material in large quantities like you need for some applications. There is also some characteristic of I don't know if iridescenza, what is the term of iridescenza, but you can use these properties, for example, for paper money, for some particular for documents, for the paper used for documents that needs some of these characteristics to prevent the replication, the not legal replication of these kind of materials and so on. So don't have all the time, but probably someone you can have a look to our laboratories. Very, very long pathway, but in some cases can be justified for the added value of this material. Because if you have to make a lot of steps to produce, for example, biodiesel or bioenergy that have a cost, a low cost compared to other products, could be not have sense to have a so complicated chain. But for example, nanocrystalline cellulose has a value that could be approximately not 2,000, but 20-30 euros per kilograms. So an important added value, not added value, an important value, economy value of that can justify the costs during the pathway. And you can see that the first step to extract NCC is the same we have just seen, steam explosion. So you can also think to integrate this pathway into, for example, bioethanol, second generation bioethanol production. Probably nanocrystalline cellulose is not broken down from the steam explosion. So you can also separate amorphous cellulose, which is degraded during steam explosion, from nanocrystalline cellulose, which is not broken down from this process. So there are a lot of potential possibilities. There are also some countries in the world that have just started with industrial production of nanocrystalline cellulose. So it's not only research, but just development at the industrial scale. And these are some laboratory systems we have for the production of NCC. We produced a very small amount of NCC, but we were able to produce some grams of NCC. Okay, I jump this part just to show you the potential application. So reinforcement, and you just have a look of reinforcement here. You just have a look to the possibilities to mix NCC with biopolymers to reinforce this weak biopolymer. Optical properties that make you move towards some kind of documents of paper or paper money, films, natural colorants, and so on. Also in medicine, for example, drug delivery. Also in protection, for example, some protective systems. So a lot of application which make a great potential to this system. Okay, time is it? Okay, if you agree, only if you agree, I continue the for another 15 minutes. So we not have a break now, and we finished a little earlier. But in this way, I have the possibility to don't lose too many times, and I can reach the end of the presentation. So, do you agree if we continue another 15 minutes without break, and then we stop at 1 o'clock or maybe at 1:15?
Yes.
It's okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Otherwise we stop 10 minutes. Then we need some minutes to restart the discussion, and so I think we are not able to complete the presentation. So I proceed. I go very quickly here because we don't need to go on detail on the studies or researches we and also a lot of other research centers are doing into this sector. But of course, there are a lot of studies to apply this NCC product to a lot of polymer and so on. So quite infinite applications. Yes, you just to see how many possibilities, plastic or bioplastic bags, a lot of industrial packages, bio packages for food, for example, drug delivery, in general packages of every kind of types. So it's the sustainable way to introduce biopolymers into a lot of applications. Biopolymers for in general have a very low chemical physical characteristics. So for example, for packages we have some problem to introduce biopolymers. NCC could be the key to make these bio packages comparable to traditional packages. So it's very interesting. Yes. Very quickly. Lignin is probably the most important subproduct you obtain from all these pathways we investigated. So cellulose and hemicellulose are so interesting in a large possibilities, a lot of possibilities. Lignin have had and have also today has some problems to be converted into a byproduct because yes, you can see here is a polymer, but it's very irregular. You can see here a composition, so there are a lot of chains, a lot of cycles, you see, and so these characteristics makes lignin not so interesting for some application. And this is the reason that lignin, the first possibility of using lignin is the simplest. You can use it like a biofuel to produce energy. All these pathways we investigated have a lot of energy requests, energy needs. And so lignin, the logical way to use lignin is to produce renewable energy. So transform a residue into a feedstock for energy production. And of course, is the most used way. But of course, you can also have more added value possibility to use lignin in a very quick way. We can see, for example, an added value for buildings materials. You can use lignin for building materials production, and it's a possibility to give sustainability also to this kind of applications. The material for street realization, and so you can use lignin to contribute to the substance you use for street realization. Lignin has very interesting antioxidant characteristics. So you can also create some products for the cosmetics or pharmaceutical sector. For example, the carbon nanotubes, for example, and in our university there is a research group that works on these applications in the Terni department. Like a board binder for a lot of materials, a lot of panels production, some foams. For example, in our laboratory, we are working to produce a biopolyurethane. Okay, so a biopolymer obtained from lignin that substitute insulation systems into building, into houses or into buildings. So another very huge range of possibility also for lignin, biofilters, for example, for the blocking, for the pollutants blocking, for example, biofilters. In the paper industry, applications in the paper industry to produce, for example, paper stocking systems. Okay, so another huge possibility also for lignin. Okay, up to batteries, lignin batteries. There is another research line that in some countries are investigating. Okay, just to complete, I block the panel, and as the final concept. Just a moment, I share this new. Can you confirm you see the biorefinery concept slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the final point I would like to reach with this course. So all the information, all the themes we investigated during this lesson, starting from biomass feedstock to all the possibilities of conversion of processes, thermochemical, biological, mechanical, and so on, to final bioproducts production. And also in this final bioproducts production, we started from energy production, which is probably the easiest way to convert biomass. So electricity, thermal energy, tree generation. We also touched this possibility. So production of cool water from biomass, and this is a possibility. Then we enlarged the concept to biofuels, and mainly liquid biofuels. Today we talked about biodiesel, bioethanol, but not only liquid, also gaseous biofuels like biogas for energy production and biomethane for transport sector. And at the end of the course, we appreciated the whole biorefinery concept. So yes, okay, yes, this is what I mean. If we want to really move from fossil fuel economy to green economy, we have to substitute in every sector fossil fuel products. And so this means that you have to produce energy, you have to produce biofuels, but also you have to produce every product with bioproducts. So bioplastics, of course, we can't, yes, we can investigate all the possible pathways, because otherwise we need 40 hours, 100 hours of course to investigate all these possibilities. But bioplastics, biolubricants, biochemicals, and this is the idea. You see a lot of lines, but this is the concept. You start from biomass, from every kind of biomass, starch, hemicellulose, cellulose, lignin, oil, protein. You see the main elements you have into the biomass feedstock, and all the possible pathways. You see 1,000 pathways here. You are not able, I think, to read everything, but it's just to understand what is this concept. So a lot of processes, intermediate, building blocks, so the building blocks for obtaining more complicated products, intermediate, up to every final use. And here we don't have time to read everything, but for example, transport sector, biofuels, oxygenates, antifreeze, fuels, biofuels for particular processes. For example, car parts. Some parts of the car can be obtained from bioplastics, lignin for biopolymers production, and so on. So you see a lot of possibilities. For example, in the building, for example, you can see insulation, bio-insulation materials, bio-coatings, bio-cements, bio-resins. So everything must be substituted for using renewable products. Okay, This is the biorefinery concept, and then you can apply this biorefinery concept to a lot of feedstock. For example, this is a very considered biorefinery typology, which is sugar platform, and we treated this sugar platform in some pathways because the idea is to use some kind of biomass, a lot of kind of biomass, and probably preferring biomass residues to obtain sugars, and you just have seen these some possible pathways. And so from sugar you start a biorefinery. So from sugars you have the possibility to produce a large variety of intermediate and final products. So not only bioethanol, not only biodiesel, but also green hydrogen, bioplastics, because bioplastics are obtained with this sugar platform. So from sugars you use some bacteria that are able to synthesize some kind of bioplastics. So it's a biological process applied to lignocellulosic biomass that are transformed into sugars. Okay, so you can appreciate the large possibilities you have. This is it's an old picture, but that show you that we are not speaking about future possibilities, but nowadays in Italy we have a lot of biorefinery examples. So it's something just acting today. For example, we as Biomass Research Center, University of Perugia, participated, and I was one of the researchers involved, participated to a research project for the realization of a biorefinery in Porto Torres, which is in the north of Sardinia, okay, where we investigated, and then we realized all the biorefinery systems, or the biorefinery pathway, just to see cardoon, okay, which is one of the energy crops we consider sustainable. Okay, cardoon is cultivated into the north of Sardinia, of course not in the fields used for traditional agriculture, but in very, very unused, abandoned fields. Only sheep were present in these fields, and yes, they used a part of this not used space, not used land to cultivate cardoon, and then you see all the steps. Just to underline, for example, you can have a lignocellulosic fraction. You move toward sugars, and hydrolysis, enzymatic hydrolysis, you can obtain sugars, and then the fermentation for the production of some kind of biochemicals. But the main pathway is to use seeds, extract them to produce vegetable oil, and then some chemical processes to obtain, chemical process is this one, for example, oxidative cut, to obtain, for example, some organic acid, azelaic acid, pelargonic acid, for example, that through some chemical steps are transformed into these bioproducts, biolubricants and bioherbicides. So two important product for agriculture and for also mechanical sectors, biolubricants and bioherbicides, are produced from cardoon in substitution of chemical and fossil fuels chemistry. Okay, so you can appreciate this, but it's not only this the purpose, the goal of this biorefinery. You just see this way. For example, the residue of seed milling, there is a panel that you can use, for example, like a feed for sheep, and so we close the circular economy. Or you can perform anaerobic digestion to produce biogas, to produce energy for the process, or the residues from anaerobic digestion is transformed in compost for example, cardoon cultivation. You see the connection to create circular local economy. Okay, and I can continue for a lot of pathways, but yes, we have to summarize. And we collaborated to this project. I don't know if you know that we have other offices, not in Perugia, but near Marciano, Sant'Apollinare, where we have a system for the extraction of vegetable oil. So we have a system for charging seeds, and it's all integrated into an historical building. So also the integration between historical and technical systems. And here we have the possibility to add the possibility to extract large quantities of vegetable oil from cardoon. And so we investigated the chain, we investigated the characteristic of this vegetable oil, and yes, just some information about the seeds, the system for the milling, the analysis, the residue from seeds milling, which is this panel that has been tested into our cow for cow feeding. Okay, this is the vegetable oil for biolubricants and bioherbicide production. So just we worked on the mass and energy flow, so a sort of life cycle assessment of the chain to evaluate how sustainable this pathway is. So you can see the huge possibility we have. Okay, so sorry for this for this speed, but I would like to reach the final goal of this course. So every theoretical elements we studied comes to this biorefinery concept. So use every process, every biomass to create a new biorefinery concept in substitution of fossil fuel refinery. Okay.
Was this project a European project, for example, of Horizon 2020 or something like that?
No, this was a national project. A national project financed for the Ministry of University that created some cluster, some national cluster, for example, green economy cluster, and financed some project like this, that is a third generation biorefinery. Third generation means that you use local sources, so lignocellulosic sources local without using agricultural fields. So this is the meaning of third generation. So residues, wastes, or energy crops like cardoon that don't use agricultural fields. It was an
How long? Okay. How long does it? How long did it last? project last?
A lot of years, because we started with I think 4 years, but then was I think 6 years at the end. 6 years project from 2012 to 2019. So also 7 years probably.
So a long time is needed.
Long time, yeah, very long time, but it was a very it was not only a research project, because it was only an industrial project. You see that we worked together with Novamont, which is an industry, because a lot of university worked at research studies, but the project was also to realize, to build a biorefinery. And the biorefinery built in the north of Sardinia.
How long does it take to reach the break-even point for this kind of plants?
It depends. It depends. It depends, because there are a lot of parameters we can consider. You have to consider that this project was in part financed from the ministry, and so of course the break-even point is shorter than if you have to make the whole investment by yourself. So it depends. In this project, the break-even point should be between I don't know, I think between 5 and 10 years. This is probably the border of these investments.
So can I say that for a biorefinery, for a biomass plant and a solar plant, break-even point is quicker for a solar plant than for a biomass plant producing energy, and the most long period for reaching the break-even point is for a biorefinery. Probably is like this, probably, roughly.
Probably when you have a long pathway, of course, in every step you need money, but you can see also this into a positive point of view, because have several local steps means to involve local companies, local agriculture farmers, local producer, and of course this complication can give a break-even point longer. But I said it depends. It depends from a lot of elements. In some cases, it's not important, the break-even point, because it's a sort of a sort of energy transition we need. So in a lot of cases, you are not interested directly on break-even point, because it's necessary. So even if some costs are higher, you need to move to this transition. So it depends. As I said to you in a lot of my answers, but it depends to too many parameters to give you a definite answer.
Oh, I see. So I think it's that a study is needed if I would like to give a suggestion to politicians to how to decide how to use the PNRR money, for example. It's needed a study, a particular study, a local study for a single town, because each town is a metropolitan city. For example, Rome is a peculiarity, no?
Of course, of course. If you want to have a more precise indication of break-even point, of the investment costs, of every economic information, you need a feasibility study. You have to start from that. Otherwise, we can apply some models, some general models, but the variability is too important to give you an answer. You must, starting also from these schemes, from this information, but you have to apply in a feasibility study just to have a preliminary information, but yes, with a good approximation.
Also considering, I guess, also considering the environment costs.
Of course.
Environmental costs, of course.
Today, nowadays, environment costs are a part you can't, you have to consider. When I speak about feasibility study, I mean technical feasibility, economical feasibility, energy feasibility, and environmental feasibility. So these points are necessary in every consideration, and of course environmental. And we have the instruments to measure the environmental impact, the environmental cost. For example, life cycle assessment, social life cycle assessment, water footprint, carbon footprint. Probably some of these instruments will be the object of other courses my colleagues will take for you.
Okay, thanks. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You are welcome. Other questions? Okay, so if you don't have any question, the next step is next Wednesday, and most of you will meet with me at 9:30 in our laboratories. So the point is biomass, biofuel and biochemicals laboratory, the first when you enter in the laboratory sector. We can have there the appointment, and so we will have approximately 2 hours of laboratory experience, and then we probably at 12 o'clock in the morning we will meet for the question, for the simple questions we will exchange. I will give you,